What do you think the great jazz guitar heavyweights of Joe Pass or Pat Metheny have in common with great country guitar players like Brad Paisley or Brent Mason? Truth be told, they probably have a few things in common, but certainly one of them is that they all predominantly use hybrid picking. And if you don't know what hybrid picking is, that's okay. The masterclass that follows will teach you everything you need to know. But in short, hybrid picking is when we hold our pick between our thumb and forefinger typically and use the remaining fingers to play additional strings, whether that's playing the notes of a chord all at once, much in the way that a piano player can play all the notes all at once, or maybe it's to play large intervallic lines, one note at a time, stretching between many different strings all at once. There are tons of upsides to hybrid picking. It's a tool that one has to have in their toolbox. And in pursuit of that, we're presenting here an excellent masterclass that will take you through a bunch of exercises, materials, and examples in real time. You can find those examples and materials, by the way, linked in the description below, so grab those. And please enjoy this great masterclass with Robb Cappelletto.
So hybrid picking, which is essentially, just a combination of using a pick and using your fingers specifically while still holding the pick. And I feel like this covers a lot of ground, right? Because this can range from essentially the way that people are playing with a thumb pick or just with their fingers, only we're integrating a pick into it. Or on the other side of the spectrum can essentially be mostly alternate picking and rest strokes with the occasional grabbing a note with your middle finger when it's more convenient, right? So it spans a lot of things. It's very useful for solo guitar arrangements, very useful for playing like wide intervals, definitely in country music as far as lead playing goes, definitely in blues. You can play classical repertoire with hybrid picking instead of just using your fingernails. Jazz chord playing, gives you a huge advantage. Essentially, like how I got into hybrid picking, because I never used to do this. When I started playing guitar, I started alternate picking because the teacher I had was a really, really good alternate picker. And as I got better, I got into more like technical music. And when you want to play through a Megadeth album, you alternate pick through it because that's how you play that music. And then I got into the rest stroke stuff through sweep picking because it was impressive and flashy and whatever. And it wasn't until later that I got into more of the detailed aspects of rest stroke playing that we talked about last week. But I think I had been playing for maybe 10 years before I started really hybrid picking. Because I used to do this. I used to play all my lines with a pick. And when I needed to do something chord or fingerstyle playing, I would put the pick on my knee or in my mouth or something and just play fingerstyle. And I had a teacher, I guess towards the end of high school when I was getting ready for my college auditions and stuff, and he said, you should just learn to play like this instead of putting the pick down all the time. And I was like, I do it the way that I do it, as a typical 16 or 17-year-old would have thought. And I kept doing it the other way, right? And I kept playing my leads with a pick and playing my chords with the pick on my knee or in my mouth or whatever. And then I went through a period after that where I played purely fingerstyle. And my goal was to only use my fingers, and my thumbnail was huge, and all these nails were huge and pointy and very finely maintained with polishes and fine sandpapers and whatnot. And I spent a long time trying to get my technique with just my fingers up to where it had been with the pick. And part of this story is very important as it relates to tonight, so I'm going to continue even though it seems like I'm getting off track here. And when I played only fingerstyle, obviously there's things that fingerstyle lets us do that you guys probably already play certain pieces, whether they're classical or folk guitar or some classic rock acoustic stuff or whatever, that you play fingerstyle already. But in dealing with the problem of speed, I worked with a teacher that kind of got me onto this thing of making your thumb your downstroke and your index finger your upstroke. And anything you would have done alternate picked, you can still do playing fingerstyle with your thumb as your down and your index as your up. So if I was just playing through a scale, it would be thumb, index. I don't keep those nails anymore, but when you have the nails, the skin of your finger doesn't mute the string, and it sounds remarkably like a pick. You can get away with all of that stuff. right? And it's like, I got to the point where I was pretty much as fast doing this as I used to be with the pick. But then we ran into the problem of, well, what do you do on a bluesy tune when you really want to dig in and you don't want to tear your nail off against the edge of the string? You know, what do you do when you're playing funk rhythm guitar and like 4 bars of leaves your nails looking like shark's teeth? You know what I mean? Like, there were just situations where, as much as I wanted to be, I'm the only playing with my fingernails kind of guy, it's like, it wasn't practical. And I thought back to the lessons I took in high school, and I'm like, you know, John was right. I should really just learn to do this. So fast forward to now, and I use a pick, and I keep these 3 nails pretty well maintained, kind of as short as possible to match the tone of the pick, so that my nail touches the string before my fingertips do, so it doesn't mute it. And in tone and volume, I can get it pretty similar. So I end up using hybrid picking for a lot of things now, just because it's convenient, because that technique has been integrated. But I have to say, my hybrid picking technique would be a mess if I didn't spend so much time on finger picking technique, because it becomes very similar what we're talking about tonight. You know, there's the aspect of I can just use the pick and play pick style and reach in with a finger when I need it occasionally, and that's fine. But I think to really get the most out of it, you have to almost treat it like classical technique, which tends to only use 4 fingers: thumb, index, middle, and ring. Only everything gets moved over. So my 4 fingers are pick, middle, ring, and pinky. And in making the kind of transition over, I went back and just tried to practice a lot of classical repertoire, just keeping in mind whenever it says use your index finger, I'm going to use my middle finger. Whenever it says use your thumb, I'm going to use my pick. And I just tried to kind of shift everything over and really integrate, you know, using the pick with using my fingers. Now, I guess, why is it
a thumb pick? I was just sorry to interrupt. A thumb pick.
So
you chose not to go that route?
This may be a personal thing. I did try the thumb pick because the teacher that got me on the alternating thumb and index finger thing, he uses a thumb pick. To this day uses a thumb pick and accomplishes great technical feats with it. It always felt weird to me. I could never, ever, ever get used to the thumb pick, and at about 3 different occasions in my life, I really gave it an effort and tried. And for me, it's like, the thumb pick never let me do the stuff the pick let me do, and it felt really weird, right? So it's like, it just wasn't the path for me. And I think when I was thinking about like the musical examples I wanted to show you guys tonight, as far as like who are some famous players that really use hybrid picking, I had to do a double take, because like a lot of them that I think of when I think of hybrid picking actually just use a thumb pick, and there's a lot of crossover there. Because players that use a thumb pick, it's like, it's not exactly fingerstyle technique, because there's times where they're putting their index finger to support the thumb pick and using it like a pick. You know, I'm thinking about guys like Brent Mason, for example. Right? When I thought, okay, hybrid picking, yeah, Brent Mason's a hybrid picking guy, but it's like he uses a thumb pick for a lot of things, like almost everything. You know, Chet Atkins, similar kinds of things. You know, when it gets into like this kind of, like the, you know, when it gets into that kind of stuff, it's like I think of that when I think of hybrid picking, but I'm pretty sure like Chet Atkins and even like Scotty Moore, I think on those Elvis things, was probably using the thumb pick as well. So there's a lot of crossover here between strict fingerstyle with a thumb pick, and then hybrid picking, where I guess on the left side of the spectrum, it's very similar to thumb pick playing, but you lose a finger because one of the fingers has to support the pick. And then on the other side, it's we start to get into kind of this more fluid approach to alternate picking, where when something's close, we'll alternate pick it, but maybe rather than skip across 4 strings, we're just going to reach with our ring finger and middle finger and grab that. So let's look at a couple players. I picked 3 players of very contrasting styles that are all players that I instantly think of when I think of hybrid picking, who actually use hybrid picking as opposed to a thumb pick. So I'm going to show you guys a few examples. Let's start on the countryside. So I mean, I think like Danny Gatton would be one of those guys that does like all the Travis picking stuff and a lot of the Chet Atkins-y stuff, but also uses a flat pick and fingers rather than a thumb pick. However, I use Danny Gatton as an example for so many of these master classes. I thought, you know what, I should switch it up tonight and use somebody else for the same purpose. So, in the spirit of keeping things current, here, let me open this up, and then I'll share it with you guys. Oh, it is already open. Wonderful. Okay, so as far as kind of the current crop of hot country players using hybrid picking, I figured let's take a look at Brad Paisley. So I'm going to go back a few seconds here and just pay attention to his right hand while he's doing this. Because, I mean, like I said, there is some alternate picking involved, but the other fingers are really important as to what's happening here. Right, so there's a bunch of things going on there. You know, he's playing pick notes and then occasionally reaching to get another string. Right? You know, when it's convenient to alternate pick. And then when he's got to jump over, maybe he wants a little bit more snap, or maybe it's just a farther reach. So let's facilitate that by using a finger. But also, you know, when he was playing double and triple stops, 2 and 3 notes at the same time, or when he's playing rolls across the strings, and I should say that rolls are kind of the finger-picked version of the sweep that we were looking at last week, right? You know, they're a way to get across the strings, but instead of using the pick to play across all the strings, we're going to assign a different finger to each string in the arpeggio. So I picked that Brad Paisley example first because he's kind of doing the 3 things that I think are the advantages of this technique. One of them is more rhythmic and tonal, which is I could play this line all picked, or I could get my middle finger in there, which mutes the string and puts a little bit more snap and bite on it. As opposed to... You know, it's got a little bit more of a different flavor to it. It's a little bit funkier sounding, definitely characteristic of that chicken pickin' sound, right? It's a little cluckier. There's more space between the notes. There's more snap on the attack of the note. When you hear it, it's more percussive. He's doing the double and triple stop stuff where we're... And now, you know, I could do that with a pick. But no matter how fast I move a pick, we're still hearing the notes in sequence. I can pick through this as fast as possible, but I'm still going at some level, right? The notes are still sounding da-da-da, even if I'm compressing that in time and doing it faster. When I'm hybrid picking and I'm plucking all of them at the same time, it's like a piano player or a vibraphone player or something. We heard all of those notes sounded at precisely the same moment. So we don't get that scrape and that really quick arpeggiation that we would get if we strummed it. We get this. We get da instead of bra. And it's the kind of thing that is a subtle difference, but it's a very audible difference, and it's a difference that you can feel in the phrasing. And again, we get the rolls across strings, which, you know, especially when we're arpeggiating things and we want to let them ring into a chord. That's a lot more difficult to do with a pick, right? To get that pick jumping around like that. As opposed to, like, to pick that is a lot of work for the right hand to do it all with the flat pick. So it makes a lot more sense, I think, to get the fingers involved in that case. I'm going to show you another player who As far as like hybrid picking in a very modern context and in a completely different stylistic context than Brad Paisley, I think is a really good example. His name's Tim Miller. I mean, obviously he's been doing this for a long time, but I think he's become a lot more visible lately because he's one of the few jazz and fusion guitarists of his generation to actually take advantage.
I grew up listening to.
Turn that down. To actually take advantage of things like Instagram to grow a following. It seems like my link didn't copy. 1 second. Sorry, guys. But Tim plays in a very interesting way. I mean, his style, as we will hear, is very fluid, similar to players like Alan Holdsworth in a lot of ways. But he picks everything with his with his pick and mostly his middle finger when he's playing single note lines. Just gotta let this load here, and I will share with you guys. Okay. And he's one of the players that I think is really using hybrid picking to take advantage of a certain fluidity, especially when you're picking each string once. That would be very, very difficult with a flat pick. He's using it for that as well as string skips. You know, when you're playing a couple notes on the D string and then maybe the notes directly after it on the high E or something, where we'd be really moving around this way a lot. He's just reaching for that with another finger on his right hand. So I'm going to full screen this. We'll take a quick look. That he just did there, he has this concept that he builds his lines and technique around that he calls 2-1-2 playing, where he'll play 2 notes on one string and then 1 note on the next string and then 2 notes on the next string and then 1. And he does this thing with his right hand where he's picking and doing a hammer on and then picking the next one with the middle finger and then pick and on the next string, then middle finger on the next string and pick on the next string, middle finger on the next string. And he uses that to get around the guitar, and I just thought it was a really interesting thing. I'll show you guys another example of him playing more line-based stuff, because that video is mostly chordal improvisation. Here. Let me show you a recent one. Oh, you know what? Excuse the video quality, but musically I think this one's cool. So let's do this one. I'm going to play this one as maybe just as an audio example because the video quality is really quite poor. This is an older clip of his. When he's crossing strings a lot is when he goes into the hybrid pick stuff. When he's playing a melody that may stay on the same 1 or 2 strings, he kind of reverts to alternate picking. right? But when he's doing the big arpeggios across strings, it's kind of pick and middle, pick and middle, pick and middle. So, Tim, I think, is very representative of a lot of modern players kind of in the progressive and fusion genres. And almost all of the younger players, I guess, who are the ones to be watching in those genres now. Players like Thomas Griggs or like Aaron Marshall, in things ranging from fusion to progressive metal or metal, they're all getting around the guitar, getting around these big string skips using hybrid picking. In genres where picking a string with your finger didn't used to be a thing, 15 or 20 years ago. So it's definitely becoming an approach that's being integrated into more styles because it has a lot of possibilities. The last example I want to show you guys is just a player named Ed Bickert, who is very much... if you like Ted Green and Lenny Breau and that kind of jazz guitar playing, Ed Bickert is definitely a player that's kind of cut from that cloth, but maybe in a less guitaristic way. Meaning, you never really saw him on the cover of Guitar Player magazine, but he was also, the guitar player who Paul Desmond would choose to hire for his albums, and who, just like bass players and drummers and saxophone players all called Ed, even if no guitar players were talking about him. Here, one second, let me share this with you guys. This is the last share, I promise, but I find it to be relevant. Okay, so here's a video of Ed playing. And let me fast forward to some music. Here we go. Where's the guitar close-up? Go here. You can see the length of his nails on the fingers that don't hold the pick. So in his case, the use of hybrid picking is really to play chords and sound them like a piano player. To really be able to hear all the notes voiced at exactly the same time. And
what's that guy's name?
Ed Bickert, Bickert.
That's awesome.
Rob, before you go on, Julian Lange.
I believe, uses hybrid picking quite a bit. Absolutely, yeah. You know what? Almost every modern jazz guitar player we can think of uses hybrid picking. If you want to think of like Kurt Rosenwinkel or Lage Lund or Mike Marino. Actually, you know what? Mike palms the pick. Mike's one of the exceptions that kind of hides the pick in his palm and then plays with the remaining fingers.
That's what what's his name does. The pop guy, guitar player. God, I can't think of his name.
Pop guy.
Another. Gosh, sorry. He had the record Gravity.
Oh, John Mayer.
John Mayer, yeah, that's his deal.
Hides it under the finger there. Most modern jazz players, to be able to get the chord playing to and this is still an option. If you wanted a little bit more strummy, but it's a much tighter feel to hear all the notes sounded at exactly the same time. If you guys want to practice that from a chord standpoint, you can even just take like the diatonic harmony in the Sonora app. The drop 2 voicings on the middle 4 strings. If you just or you know what, even the drop 3 voicings, because they're 4-note chords, just assign your pick to the lowest note, your middle finger to the next note, then your ring and your pinky to the subsequent notes, right? So when I'm playing, let's just start on the drop 2s on the middle 4, like these shapes. I'm putting my pick on the A string all the time. My middle finger right next to it is an upstroke on the D string. My ring finger is plucking up on the G. My pinky is plucking up on the B string. And my goal is to hear all those 4 notes sounded at the same time. And I'm kind of closing my hand very gently and drawing it away from the strings like this. And that pullback, I think, is a very essential part of that motion. I'm not keeping my hand here and trying to pluck in. I mean, even if I try to do that, it still ends up pulling away, right? But smoothing out that action, kind of drawing the sound out of the chord, I think keeps everything smooth, right? And it's just a simple closing motion of the hand, and the fingers are lined up on the string they need to close on. So if I play a chord scale on those middle 4 strings, you know, C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, B minor 7 flat 5, and C major, right? And if you want to work on those, just really trying to get it to sound like the chord is happening as one event, and as opposed to rolling through it, which is kind of just like strumming through it with your fingers, right? You want to work on getting it tight. Because using the pick or using a roll is cool when you want to hear your big chords, right? When you want to hear, that's cool. But when I want to play a rhythmic figure and I want it to be really punctuated, or if I'm playing like, I don't know, like So What by Miles Davis or something, right? That I want that to all sound like a horn section all playing together, or like a piano player hitting those voicings. The voicings for that tune, if you guys don't have them, are just 7, 7, 7, 8. Just fourths all the way across. And legend has it that Miles wrote that arrangement on an acoustic guitar in the studio by doing this. Just barring those fourths across the bottom 4 strings of a guitar. Because the melody of that tune is... So the stories I've heard from a bunch of people are that Miles, not knowing how to play guitar at all, wrote that tune on an acoustic guitar that was kicking around the studio. Because that's what the harmony arrangements are, just fourths. But it sounds muddy if we play it here. If we play it on the middle 4 strings and compensate that fourth with the middle finger, it rings nice and clear on the guitar. So yeah, and I was saying you could do the same thing with the drop 3s, like with these voicings. The ones that skip the A string. You know, now hybrid picking really helps, because if we were strumming that with our pick, the muting of the A string is key. But wouldn't it be better if we didn't have to clunk past that muted string at all? We could just avoid it. Pick on the low E, nothing touching the A string, middle finger on the D, ring finger on the G, pinky on the B. You know, and we can work out those voicings as well. Up that string set with the root on the low E, drop 3 voicings in root position. And it's just, you know, it's a nicer option to have. To be able to hear all the notes at once and to not have to kind of strum through everything, you know? When I'm comping in a jazz setting, it's like I'm almost always doing that. Again, sometimes I'm using the pick for emphasis if I want to hear the chord speak in that way. But it's like there's a lot of this going on, I'd say most of the time. Okay, let me show you guys some musical examples. The first one is a lot of fun. Definitely tinged on the countryside. I'm just going to put them in the chat here, as last week. So this one is like your typical banjo roll adapted for the guitar. And we're going to work on... I guess getting the coordination together between your pick, middle finger, and ring finger only. This one doesn't include the pinky, if everybody wants to open this one up. I'm going to share screen just so I can cursor over the things I'm talking about. Here we go. So, picking symbols are here as they were last week. Downstroke still means downstroke. And the finger notation is derived from classical notation, where M is obviously middle, but A is the ring finger. So this is pick, hammer on, middle finger, ring finger, pick, hammer on, middle finger, ring finger. And that's kind of the pattern of the thing. I'll play you guys the example so I can keep the share screen open. I'll play it here. Right, and that's the kind of thing where I'm demonstrating it slowly, but you know, when you get it up in speed, it's kind of fun. Right? You know, it's a kind of thing you can have fun with. You can do it with really any arpeggio shape, any chord shape where each note is on a different string. Putting the hammer on one of the strings, I think, gives it a little bit of rhythmic interest. But it's a fairly easy shape to work on, and I tried to keep it that way, you know, to be our first example. If it's too much of a stretch there, holding down between the 3rd and 7th frets, just raise it up a few positions, right? If we make it, you know, instead of 3rd up to 7th frets, let's make it, you know, 10th up to 12th. If that's kind of more within your grip comfort to start with, and then you can work it downwards. But essentially what's happening is pick on the G string, hammer up on the G string, middle finger plucks the B string, ring finger plucks the E string, and then that's just the pattern. And as far as left hand, it's not like the rest stroke exercises last week where we're getting off the note as we get onto the previous one. We're just holding this down like a chord that happens to have a hammer on in it. And again, the fact that we're plucking those other strings with our fingers gives it a little bit of extra sauce it wouldn't have if I was using the pick to get all those notes to speak. Because just the motion of touching your fingertip to the string is going to stop it just for a second and kind of separate the notes. And it keeps things a little bit more separate, keeps them a little bit more clucky sounding, for lack of a better term, right? If I were to play all with the pick, it's pretty sustained, but there's a little bit more punctuation on these notes because the finger's grabbing them and pulling a little bit and stopping them a little bit before doing so. I'm just going to let that in here. Okay. So I did another example for tonight, which is kind of combining more of the pick as we would normally use it, and also using some double stops as well. Like a bluesier example. I mean, you know, depending on how you articulate it, kind of anything hybrid picking comes out sounding country if you want it to. But I find like in blues playing, this stuff can be really useful as well. Here's another example for tonight. I just put it in the chat there. I'll share the sound slice with you guys. Okay, so this one here, I'll play it there just so we can all follow along together. So we've got downstroke, downstroke, upstroke with a pick, downstroke, downstroke. And then, where are the finger notations? Did they not make it? They may not have made it. Oh, no, that's not the right one then. Here, sorry guys. I shared one of next week's that doesn't yet have the finger notations in it. Sorry, let me get you the right one. I'm just going to talk a little about it first. So just kind of getting into the stuff that we saw in that first Brad Paisley example, where we're talking about using combining some pick playing in a melodic sense, but when we want to hear 2 or 3 notes at the same time, bringing in middle and ring kind of together, it's kind of like a claw motion, you know, if I do it from this angle. There, I'm not using the pick at all. Playing those double stops between the G and B strings. I apologize for the delay here, guys. Let me just find you the proper example. Here we go. Okay, this one here. All right. Okay, here we go. And you can see right at the end there, I used the downstroke, and then rather than an upstroke, I used my middle. And that's kind of purely a tone thing. That kind of comes back to the story I was telling, you know, when I worked on getting all my pick style stuff together as fingerstyle. And I was using my pick as my I was using my thumb as my downstroke and a finger as my upstroke. I kind of applied the same thing to hybrid picking as well, you know, where purely as a tonal thing, rather than playing this, just picked up and down, I tried it pick as my down and middle finger as my up. And it's just a little bit more staccato, and I still use that, you know, when playing funkier things, or when I'm digging in and I just kind of want a little bit more of an aggressive sound or a little more snap to the sound. If I play the same line twice, the middle finger just puts a little bit more snap on it. It gives me it makes my upstrokes or my perceived upstrokes and downstrokes, because one of them is a finger, sound a little less even in a way that I think can be good for the music sometime. Let me put that in the chat for you guys, the one that I just shared. So here it is, right under the listed 1, 2, 3 ones. And thanks, Jim, for sharing the first week's exercises. I appreciate that. So with that last sound slice that I posted, I mean, there's a number of ways to chop it up. You know, you can use the pick more or less than I used it. You can substitute the upstrokes that I played with the middle finger if you want. At the end of the day, it's really a personal thing. I would suggest kind of playing it the way that it's written out to get your bearings, but then don't be afraid to try it different ways. You know, just because I played something down, up, down, doesn't mean you can't go pick, middle, pick. If doing it in the context of a lick like that seems like a bit of a jump, and the technique still feels new, I mean, I tell all my students this. My go-to with any new right-hand technique is just 6-string front 4 major scale. And 6-string front 4 major scale in thirds or sixths. Just because those are playing something with a bunch of notes on each string, and playing something that's quickly skipping and alternating strings, right? When I'm doing thirds, I'm alternating between adjacent strings. When I'm doing sixths, there's a string skip in there, right? So it's like, you know, just sticking with, you know, the first thing you probably learned in this course, 6-string front form. It's the first scale fingering I ever learned in my life. And it's still like, when I'm working on the right hand and concentrating on the right hand, I want to give as little brain power, preferably as close to 0 as possible, to what this hand is doing, so I can concentrate here. So when I started alternate picking, I learned to alternate pick on this scale form. When I went to finger picking, I learned to finger pick with every possible combination of 2 fingers on this scale form. When I tried to use a thumb pick with no success, I tried it on this scale form. And when I learned to hybrid pick, I learned on this scale form. I mean, if a different scale form is more comfortable to you, that's cool. But essentially, like, when we're practicing something, particularly technique, we want to focus on the thing we want to focus on. You know, don't try and learn a new picking technique while playing a G-flat melodic minor scale starting on the 4th finger if you've never done that before, and try and kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Because at the end of the day, you're not going to learn the scale fingering, and you're also not going to ingrain the right hand technique. So pick the scale or passage or whatever that you're the most comfortable with, and try and apply the new right hand technique to that.